What if Iran and Israel went nuclear? The war that could end everything. June 2025. The world is holding its breath. Israeli warplanes have struck deep into Iranian territory. Iranian proxies have unleashed a wave of rocket fire across the region. The Red Sea is no longer safe for international trade. American carriers now sit within striking distance of the Persian Gulf. And behind every headline is a silent, glowing threat: the nuclear option. In the shadows of diplomacy and military posturing, one question grows louder with every passing day. What if one of them actually did it? What if Iran or Israel launched a nuclear strike? And what if the United States got directly involved? Tonight, we're going beyond headlines and hype. We're stepping into the terrifying world of what if. This is not a fantasy. This is what tomorrow could actually look like. Let's imagine the worst happens. At 3:22 a.m. local time, satellite surveillance picks up a heat signature east of Isfahan, Iran. Seconds later, Israeli intelligence confirms it. A Jericho-3 missile has been launched. The target, Natanz, Iran's primary nuclear enrichment facility. But this time, it's not conventional warheads. Within seconds, tens of thousands are dead. Radiation spreads across central Iran. The world changes forever. And now Tehran must choose its response. Iran, now under direct nuclear attack, sees no option but retaliation. While it doesn't officially possess nuclear weapons, decades of clandestine research have made one thing possible: a dirty bomb. At 5:09 a.m., a Hezbollah cell detonates a radiological device in Haifa. Sirens wail in Tel Aviv. The Iron Dome, built for missiles, is powerless against radioactive fallout. Across the region, every ally, every enemy, is forced to pick a side. Syria's skies are filled with drones. Lebanon becomes a launchpad. Iraq is caught in the crossfire. The Suez Canal shuts down. Oil prices spike past $300 a barrel overnight. Global stock markets begin to collapse. Meanwhile, Washington is silent for 6 hours. Then a single message: we are preparing for full-spectrum deterrence. Aircraft carriers in the Gulf switch to DEFCON. 2 nuclear submarines move into position. B-2 Tabamas lift off from Diego Garcia. The world inches closer to World War III. Is just the beginning. Immediate aftermath: humanitarian and military fallout. The missiles may have landed, but the destruction is just beginning. Within 24 hours of the nuclear exchange, Tehran and Haifa become ghost cities. Emergency services collapse. Hospitals run out of supplies. Geiger counters become as essential as food and water. The Natanz strike unleashes not only destruction, but a plume of radioactive ash drifting across Central Asia. Winds carry particles over parts of Afghanistan, even western Pakistan. Meanwhile in Israel, the dirty bomb in Haifa leaves over 60,000 exposed to radiation. Birth defects, cancer rates, and mass evacuations dominate the headlines. The United Nations declares a level 7 nuclear event, the highest possible. For reference, Chernobyl was also level 7, but unlike Chernobyl, this is intentional. This is war. Millions begin to flee. Iran's western border with Iraq becomes a bottleneck. Kurdish regions, already unstable, turn into refugee camps. In Israel, mass evacuations begin toward the Negev desert and Eilat. European nations debate accepting Israeli refugees. Jordan, overwhelmed, closes its borders. Egypt declares martial law on the Sinai. The Iranian regime, under extreme pressure, authorizes massive retaliatory strikes. Hezbollah launches over 4,000 rockets into northern Israel. In Iraq, Iranian-aligned militias begin targeting U.S. bases. In Syria, Russian mercenaries clash with U.S. special forces near Deir ez. Yemen's Houthis fire ballistic missiles at Saudi oil refineries. The Strait of Hormuz is mined. 20% of the world's oil supply is cut off. Gasoline in the U.S. hits $9 a gallon. Chinese and Indian markets, knows. And then comes the invisible war. Iranian cyber units unleash waves of ransomware on American banks, shutting down ATMIS in New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. In response, the NSA disables Iran's power grid for 6 hours. Hospitals go dark. Air traffic control fails. Panic turns into riots. The war that started in the shadows of 2 cities is now a wildfire, consuming half the planet. Global reactions: US, NATO, Russia, China, and others. When nuclear fire erupts between nations, the war zone is only the beginning. What follows is a test of alliances, red lines, and global power. The United States red lines crossed at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The President of the United States addresses the nation. This is no longer a regional conflict. The United States will not stand by. Operation Iron Resolution is launched. 35,000 troops are mobilized. 3 aircraft carrier groups now flank the Persian Gulf. B-52 bombers are positioned in Qatar. And F-35s patrol Jordanian airspace. U.S. forces begin airstrikes on Iranian missile sites, command centers, and naval facilities. Cyber Command disables Iran's banking network, but Iran's proxies respond instantly. American troops in Iraq and Syria face daily bombardments. The Green Zone in Baghdad is hit. U.S. embassies in Beirut and Muscat are evacuated. And then, A U.S. destroyer is sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. 21 sailors killed. Now, it's war. Russia, quiet moves behind the curtain. While the West scrambles, Russia watches carefully. On state TV, Putin condemns the violence, but blames NATO expansion and Israeli aggression. Behind the scenes, Russian advisors arrive in Tehran. Advanced S-50 missile systems are flown into Iran. Russian naval ships move into the Mediterranean. Moscow doesn't want a nuclear exchange, but it does want to weaken S dominance. And this war is a golden opportunity. China, the balancer and opportunist, Beijing issues carefully worded statements about de-escalation and mutual respect, but behind closed doors, China ramps up oil imports from Russia and Iran at deep discounts. The Chinese Navy expands its presence in the Indian Ocean. Taiwan's military reports increased incursions. While the West burns, China is quietly repositioning for global leverage. This is the chaos it is prepared for. NATO and the EU. Fractured unity, NATO calls for Article 4 consultations. But unity is fragile. France and Germany refuse to commit troops. Poland, the UK, and the Baltic states support U.S. involvement. Turkey, caught between allies in geography, mobilizes forces near its eastern border, but refuses to allow U.S. planes to use its airspace. Inside Europe, protests erupt. Gas shortages lead to rationing, inflation spikes, far-right and far-left parties surge in the polls. The rest of the world, strategic silence and moral panic. Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, and other rising powers issue calls for peace, but also begin quietly. Pakistan issues a nuclear alert after radiation drifts toward Baluchistan. India mobilizes. Global trade slows to a crawl. Insurance firms stop covering oil tankers. The UN. The world isn't just watching a war. It's watching the beginning of a new world order. Being born through fire. Long-term consequences. Political ANOB economic. The war may have started with a flash of light, but its shadow will last for generations. This is what the world begins to look like after the bombs. Political fallout. Regimes collapse. New powers rise in Iran. The Ayatollah's regime fractures. Half the Revolutionary Guard splits off, loyal to hardline clerics demanding full-scale jihad. Tehran falls into civil war. In Israel, emergency elections bring a unity government, but civil unrest surges, faith in leadership collapses. Hundreds of thousands relocate permanently to Europe, North America, and Australia. The Middle East is no longer a battlefield that's a black hole of power vacuums and proxy chaos. Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq begin to fragment U.S. influence in the region, irreparably damaged. Environmental catastrophe, nuclear winter in miniature though limited in scale. The nuclear strikes create a chilling ripple effect. Fires across Iranian oil fields release tens of millions of tons of soot. Temperatures drop by an average of 1.3 degrees Celsius across parts of the northern hemisphere. Crop cycles are disrupted. Wheat yields fall by 15% in the U.S. and Ukraine. Global food prices double. Radiation lingers in Haifa and central Iran for decades. Cancer rates skyrocket. The Middle East becomes a no-go zone for generations. Climate change, already a global threat, now accelerates under the chaos of war. Economic collapse. A new Great Depression. Oil prices stabilize at $270 a barrel. The global supply chain collapses. Major economies enter simultaneous recessions. In the U.S., unemployment hits 15%. Food stamps and emergency relief double overnight. In Europe, energy rationing returns. In Africa, entire nations face famine as aid is redirected toward war. The World Bank declares the worst economic crisis since 1929. Only a few nations remain stable. Switzerland, Australia, Singapore. The rest, spiraling debt, political instability, and mass migration. The nuclear domino effect, and perhaps most dangerous of all, is the precedent. For the first time since 1945, nuclear weapons have been used in war. The taboo is broken. Japan, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia begin nuclear weapons programs. North Korea celebrates, issuing a chilling statement: "The world now respects strength. We will not hesitate." The idea of a small, regional conflict is gone. The world now lives under the constant threat of the next bomb. The war that changed everything in less than 72 hours. The world we knew vanished. A single missile fired in fear collapsed economies and reshaped global power. All because two nations reached the brink and stepped over it. What did we learn? Nuclear weapons were once built as deterrence, but deterrence only works until it doesn't. When ancient rivalries meet modern firepower, when diplomacy fails and ego takes control, the future becomes a battlefield, and the cost is everything. What happens now? The next generation will grow up in a world defined by what happened in those dark days of June 2025. Borders have changed, alliances have shattered, trust is extinct, and somewhere, someone is already planning for the next strike. This wasn't fiction, this was a warning. Because if we've learned anything from history, it's this: it never starts with the bomb, but it always ends there. This was What If. Stay awake, stay aware, and pray we never. The war that changed everything in less than 72 hours. The world we knew vanished. A single missile fired in fear, or fear unleashed a chain reaction that killed millions, collapsed economies, and reshaped global power. All because two nations reached the brink and stepped over it. What did we learn? Nuclear weapons were once built as deterrence, but deterrence only works until it doesn't. When ancient rivalries meet modern firepower, when diplomacy fails and ego takes control, the future becomes a battlefield, and the cost is everything. What happens now? The next generation will grow up in a world defined by what happened in those dark days of June 2025. Borders have changed, alliances have shattered, trust is extinct, and somewhere, someone is already planning for the next strike. This wasn't fiction, this was a warning. Because if we've learned anything from history, it's this. It never starts with the bomb, but it always ends there. This was What If. Stay awake, stay aware, and pray we never live this timeline.